Welcome. I'm Phil Cornish. I am your host for Cornish Talks Common Sense. A while back, I spoke to you in one episode about the aftermath of the Roe v Wade case. Since that time, the decision of the United States Supreme Court has come down. Let's talk about what that means. I'll be right back. Roe v Wade. That decision, which has endured since 1973, has now been overturned by the United States Supreme Court in a decision in late June of this year. What does that mean? Well, we've seen the aftermath of what has happened with protesters who have stalked Supreme Court justices, who have firebombed and committed mischief against pro-life clinics in many locations and cities across the United States. This kind of behavior by left-wing radicals is shocking. So what do we make of the reaction of the left-wing mob to this decision? Well, let me again remind you that the Roe v Wade decision in 1973 was really created out of whole cloth. It had no reference to the Constitution. It followed a case called Griswold in Connecticut that had talked about the idea of privacy rights with respect to contraception. But the court in Roe v Wade took a huge leap into the dark by prescribing that abortions would be allowed within certain limits going forward in the United States. And that decision has endured for 50 years. How did it come about? What influenced it? Well, there's no question it was politically influenced. And it was influenced by what I'm going to call the zeitgeist, the ethos of the time that existed in the 1970s and the late 1960s. And that is a world that came to be dominated by protests, by feminism, by the sexual revolution. And all of those things, as you know historically, that were unfolding in the 1960s and 1970s, really were the precursor for the kind of thinking that led to the Roe v Wade decision. It didn't just happen out of the blue. It happened because people started to control the structures of society where their influence shifted the thinking into a new direction. So academia, universities, the Hollywood entertainment industry, governments and other structures came to be dominated by the kind of left-wing thinking that espoused the idea that the human fetus is really of no great consequence, and certainly it would be traded off against the rights of women whose reproductive rights should come first and foremost. Well, I'm here to tell you that there has been huge consequences because of that. And the Roe v Wade decision not only was not well-founded in law and was not supported by sound legal precedent, but also has led to the unfolding of huge consequential behaviors that have unfolded. Over 50 million abortions have occurred since 1973 in the United States alone. We've also seen, going hand in hand with the idea of being able to access an abortion easily, the idea of how the sexual revolution has come to to dominate thinking, and the consequences of that have also been clear. I have some statistics with me today that talk about now that nearly half, 42% of American adults now have the HPV virus. For example, in 2019 alone, there were over 2.5 million cases of sexually transmitted diseases that occurred new in the United States. So these are the kinds of consequences that have unfolded from the thinking that occurred in the 1960s and 70s society that is touched by the ideology that was fostered by Michel Foucault, who I've talked to you about now in several programs, the idea of personal empowerment, the idea of claiming rights. And so responsibility for behavior has taken a back seat. We want rights. We don't want responsibility. And so rights has dominated, responsibility has taken a back seat. What we don't understand as well is that the history of abortion is largely based on eugenics. The idea of inferior races or inferior people by virtue of disability can and perhaps should be aborted. And that horrific thinking was largely founded by Margaret Sanger, who was the founder of Planned Parenthood, one of the strongest advocates in United States for the abortion movement. So eugenics is a legacy of Roe and Wade. And so we see today, why are there very few Down syndrome children even being born today? Well, simply, frankly, because now they're being aborted. So the idea is, well, I guess if we can kill them before they're born, that's okay. What kind of morality espouses that thinking of human beings killing their own preborn children? I mean, this kind of thinking shows how twisted our values have become. And so, we see some people who have charities that would praise disabled groups if they're born. But what we don't hear about is all of those who would abort people with disabilities and don't even get the chance of life because of being aborted. So there are huge consequences to what Roe and Wade has unleashed on society. And we've dehumanized life. I mentioned in a prior program about the idea of calling the human preborn child a fetus, this Latin word from a dead language, Latin, which perhaps parallels the idea of a dead preborn baby being aborted. These are the kind of language games that the left-wing people utilize. And so that's why today we hear about words like wokeism and other terms that are used, for example, instead of mother, calling people birthing persons instead of mothers. Language games are being played by those who espouse abortion, and just the use of the depersonalized term fetus is one of those. A fetus is a person. Every one of us was a fetus at the early stage of our life. And the notion that a preborn child is anything but a human being is simply completely medically, biologically wrong-headed. And so it leads to the question as well, do pro-choice people, would they support infant sacrifice like used to happen in pagan societies where newborn infants were sacrificed to pagan gods? I think most people today would say, well, we'd have trouble supporting that. But yet they're willing to support the abortion of preborn children who are only weeks different in age from an infant. And so one cannot imagine supporting the aborting of preborn children for the frivolous kinds of reasons that are given today. And so what about the idea then of my body, my choice? Because that's probably the primary excuse or rationalization that people use for supporting abortion. And so I say in answer to that, really? My body, my choice? Well, what about vaccine mandates? Okay, governments want to have control over your body by vaccines. Is that okay? Seems to be okay with some people, but yet apparently not those who espouse abortion and want control over their body. There's inconsistency there. And then what about the idea of alcohol and drug laws? People understand that if they drink and drive or consume drugs and drive, they can be arrested because they've put substances into their body that affect their behavior, affect their judgment, affect their driving ability. And so our laws decree that there should be boundaries on that there are justified reasons why the state and why government might have reason to have control over our bodies. This happens in a number of contexts in our world. So this idea of my body, my choice is a phony argument. It is a phony argument perpetrated by feminists who use it only for propaganda purposes. So the legacy of Roe and Wade, a legacy really of, more than anything else, the philosopher Michel Foucault, is one that has led us into a perilous state, where as a human race, we have been willing to abort our offspring, our future generations. And the rationalization for that is brought out in emotional response. What I've already talked to you about, the advent of feelings, the predominance of feelings and emotions. And so we see that with people who protest and are emotionally driven to commit violence and frankly acts that are against the rule of law. This is not something a civilized democratic society can or should support. And I would urge people to reflect on these deeper thoughts when viewing the aftermath of Roe and Wade and the laws that now exist, at least in the United States, under Dodd, by looking and considering at the derivation of how we got to the point we are today, what Roe and Wade unleashed in our society, and the consequences it's had. Thank you for listening. We hope to be back again for another program shortly.